Hi, everybody. It's Paul E. Pratt with Wrestling Inc. And I'm so excited today to bring you this exclusive interview with the incredible and iconic, obviously legendary Mickie James. Mickie, how are you?
I'm so good. I'm so happy to be here and talking to you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for joining me. And there's so much to sort of unravel here. We've seen your career go from some pretty low points recently, some kind of devastating low points for you, it seemed like, to some very exciting things for the future. And I'm really, really looking forward to talking to you about that. So, with this kind of evolvement we've seen in your career from the points of a few weeks ago, even just a few weeks ago, announcing your WWE release to now discussing the Empower pay-per-view, all-female pay-per-view for NWA. Talk to us a little bit about that kind of emotional roller coaster you have to have been on.
Um, it's funny because I feel like that roller coaster that we talk about is just my entire career. I think it's all of our careers. It's a constant roller coaster. It's never like constantly at this high. There's ebbs, there's flows, there's loops, there's swoops, there's all these things. And um, I just as far as the last stuff, and I've kind of like trying to push this more in a positive like me
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be able to head up this project and to be the first woman to be able to head up a television product, pay-per-view product, for mainstream, and to be underneath the NWA umbrella to do that because of the history and the nostalgia and the respect for the brand and how long it's been around. I think if NWA is the first to step up and do it and say, "Hey, we want to do something special for the women and really cultivate a space for them," then everyone else will follow suit. And I think within the relationships that we have within the NWA with everyone, because of the history, because of the respect, I think it just is a real it's a real cool place for me to be sitting right now, especially with everything, because I really did go like, okay, so then what am I going to do now? Am I going to go out and wrestle everybody? Because I know I can and I could, and I'd have some amazing matches, and the talent out there now is even deeper than it ever was before, and that's the biggest thing I'm learning on this side of it as the executive producer, as I'm personally looking for these talent and trying to cultivate these matches and the card to like really speak to everybody, about how much love there is for women's wrestling in the business overall. um it's work. There's so much talent out there, and that's what I'm really, because being removed from it for 5 years, in the space of all this stuff really swelling up and growing, even in you know COVID and the pandemic.
Mhm.
I think it's, as we're coming out of that, and it's now more than ever that it could really, really make a statement. This, in my opinion, but for what
Yeah,
you.
and I agree. And one of the things, like in a positive light, even towards the end of what I saw of you in WWE on television, I remember the thing that stood out to me the most the last time I saw you actually on a big screen, for WWE, is you walked to that ring and you looked like you're in the best physical condition of your entire career. Like, I looked at you and I was like, oh my gosh, she looks the best I've seen her actually in the WWE run. You looked rejuvenated and you looked, um like, and fit and just like ready to show up. And I was wondering, what was the mindset of you in those, like, in that return to the ring? Because there had to be, that you had been out for a bit, and you, like, what was
Yeah.
your mindset wanting to come back?
Well, I think because for the first time in my career, in my entire career, I had a real injury, like a real injury that I
Mhm.
had to. I've had injuries, obviously, but none that I've taken time off for. Like, in the sense, if it organically happened, I've separated my shoulder. I broke my other shoulder, didn't even realize it was, thought it was just because I've jacked them both up twice. Um, but I never really just took time off for an injury. I never had to.
Mhm.
I just worked around it. So for the first time in my career at 20 years at that point, like from baby little Alexis Three just starting learning how to grab a headlock to that point, that was my first serious injury and a torn ACL. And I thought that it was going to probably put me out for like, a couple months. I had such an unrealistic expectation, or didn't even realize what the surgery entailed and then the rehab and stuff coming back. So I think that I had already been talked to about, like, we'd already had discussions about that potential for me to move more behind the scenes and to help some of these younger talent. And I was totally excited and open to it. But the only thing that I really wanted was like, okay, can we just put like a little button on this, like a little, just a little bow or something? And so then there's no, I think, wrestler brain, Mickey James, who's wanted to be the best her whole career and to win championships and that. Like, I just wanted something, and it wasn't even like a championship or anything. I just wanted a moment or a story or the ability to perhaps make somebody on my way out, because then that would feel like, okay, that satisfied that. I
Mhm.
can hang my hat on that, and now I can put 10,000 of my hours in just this and not have to feel like there's some unfinished business on the other side. And I think that is something that every wrestler wants and every wrestler prays for. They would love to have that moment, that piece, that tie off. The reality is probably 10% actually get it. You know what I mean? And so I did want that, and maybe I had unrealistic expectations as if I deserved that, and maybe we didn't agree or whatever the case may be. But or maybe
I,
it
I
was
just have to stop you there because I do not think this is one of the things in researching this and preparing myself for this. I've watched a significant number of interviews with you, and
Mhm.
I think that your humility is charming and beautiful, and it's part of what we as your audience and fans love about you. But isn't there a time in your career where you're like, I'm a multiple time women's world champion? Your name goes in the same class as Trish and Lita and your peers, and they all got that. So
Yeah. Well, Lita, not so much when you think about it. Like, her final match and her outro was kind of, I was involved in that segment and I remember it. And I remember, and I was kind of like, huh, that kind of sucks. Like, for her, because, and I understood that she was a heel, but then I go, like, that's going to be, and grateful, amazingly, she's been able to come back and just people have kind of forgotten about that moment. But that was her outro of like her retirement from in ring on television performing for a long time. And I was just like, whoa, because that's one, Trish had like a huge, like the whole
yes,
thing as she deserves. She's amazing. But I felt like Lita deserved kind of this, she deserved the same thing in my
as do
mind
you.
because of how influential she was for me. And you try to separate, oh, business and personal, and I love both of those women so much, but I think that they equally um really helped define a whole new era of women, myself included, that wanted to be and take it to that level. You know what I mean? And they each captured a whole different audience and brought them in. Like, it was just, it was a cool see their rivalry and their friendship and everything was a really, for me, that was like that generation of wrestling right before that I had a chance to kind of tiptoe into, as they were the only two really left in there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't
But
know.
you deserve, the point was that you deserve that same kind of thing.
I
So
think that I had had conversations. I'll be honest. Like, I had conversations, and it got to a point where I was like, I can't wrap my head around. I don't understand. Um, and there, and then it's almost like you get kind of humbled, or then I'm sitting back home, and I kind of go like, well, if they don't, if whoever it is doesn't think that I need that or deserve it, or it should be a thing, or it's just, yeah, I think too, because television is shot now like kind of week to week, up to one pay-per-view, and then it's on to storylines move so quickly that perhaps they thought that they wouldn't be able to get that same emotional involvement that I you know thought it could get, in a sense, because they just don't write television in six. I mean, that was the art, like the real beauty of my storylines in my first run, is there was really development into the stories and a definitive payoff at some point, like
right,
where we could tell that story backwards, right? So then what happened stages, and a lot of times now I think, because people's attention spans or the way stories are written are so quick and they get bored easy, like they just move so quickly. But I think, I don't necessarily believe that that's a good thing, because I think that it takes a person a certain amount of time to become emotionally invested into anyone. So
absolutely.
uh yeah, it's a catch 22, isn't it? So I don't know. But it's fine now. It's fine. Perhaps I can prove that I deserve it in another space. You know what I mean? In another level. And then it'll be that much more magical when it does happen. So
for
I try
fans,
to
you
think
don't have
positive.
to. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And for fans, I'm going to tell you, for fans, you don't have to prove that you deserve that.
No, you're sweet. But I just never want to come off of, because I am very grateful for my entire career. I'm grateful for all my opportunities and even all of my shortcomings, because they helped get me to here, you know? Um, so I never want to come off that way, you know, because there's
Hmm.
a reason why I'm trying to head up this thing. And I think it's because it's a fulfilling place for me, because it is what
Absolutely.
I devoted a lot of my arguments and my energy in on that. Well, if I can't get this thing to happen, this button, this bow or whatever, okay, fine. But what can we do something like this? And that was also, so I was just like, well, maybe it's me, bro. Like maybe it's just me, and it's okay. Well, and now, you know, since then I have an opportunity to actually do it and do it the way I saw it and do the way, you know, I feel it should go. And now I have an opportunity to either prove them right or prove myself right. And I'm going with me. I'm betting on me, you
Y-
know?
We always should. You know, you explained one of the questions that I did have is I'd watched this or I'd listened to this interview you had with Busted Open, where you seemed to indicate that they had sort of wanted to move you behind the scenes and make you a producer. And I remember Lita telling me in a conversation one time that she had been offered a similar role and she really wanted to be there to advocate for other women in an environment where there's not a lot of women's voices speaking up for that division, you know, for people
Right.
like you. And
Hmm.
it seems that you answered why it is that you were sort of steered away from that idea, because I think that you'd be an amazing advocate behind the scenes for
And
women and
I
telling
would have
stories.
loved that. I would have absolutely loved that. And I think that a lot of the girls trusted me, and I have a good relationship with all of them. I love all of those girls. You know, there's a really strong locker room in their spirit, and they're hungry, and everybody wants the same thing. You know, like everybody wants the women's division to be at this level, you know, and I think it is. And I do believe that the women there are very much like highlighted and shown in a very awesome light, and they can do amazing things. But I think also we've cultivated and created places for younger talent to kind of grow and get that experience on television, and to really define their characters and get comfortable in it. So that way, by the time you bring them to television, they're
Mm.
over prepared, right? Like they're ready to go by the time you, instead of learning on television. Because I always think that's such a hard thing to do for any character, is to learn on TV in front of millions of people, you know, like, because the fans now are brutal. They're brutal, and that can set back a person who's really trying to make it. And if they're very young and green in the business, it can set them back 2 years before the fans actually start to think that they are a viable opponent for anyone, you know? So I would rather help, you know, fast track that for these girls. And that's what I'm really working on now with people that I know, that I trust, that have zero alternative, like they are just out for the end goal of all the girls, and to fast track that for them, so they can just get there. They can learn the how from champions, from people who have been there, done that, got t-shirts, you know, myself included, like one, I think that was one. Anyway, uh, to really perfect and fine tune their craft to then be freaking superstars, you know, and really looked at in that same level of respect across the board, and not just as female wrestlers, but just as wrestlers. And that's, you know,
You talk about like trying to fine tune a character, and has felt to me for a long time that of all the places that you've competed, and it's been a lot, that the place that WWE really had the least grasp on who Mickie James as a character or a personality was. And I look at some of the other people that were with you in that class of people who were released in the Iconics and Ruby Riot later on. And like, these are people who it seems that WWE struggled to understand how to present. And
right.
my perception as a fan is that they present a certain kind of character extremely well, and then want to replicate that character with various different performers.
Hmm.
I was just wondering what your perception of that was.
Or like you think like they need to fit in this, like, okay, this is this box and this is, yeah, they're, I mean, obviously, and I think that every girl is different in their own way. um I'll be honest, like I kind of hindsight there was a moment when I was talking to the office and the Hunter and whoever else, and they asked me, "What do you want to do?" And when I come back, because I had the Oscar match, and I thought that was going to be a one and done thing, and I was super excited. I had already started to plan for my exit out of the ring
Mhm.
because I realized I was only really taking indie bookings. I tried to fish out WWE to see if there was any interest. There wasn't a whole lot of feedback, so I was like, okay. I was kind of not done with TNA, but I didn't want to go backwards. I just kind of wanted to move forward,
Right.
with everything and just kind of take that next step because I had a son, I was a new mom, I'm just juggling so much stuff, and Nick's stuff was really starting to take off in wrestling as well. And I felt like, well, I can just sit back and mom and travel and do my appearances, but then work on another thing, work on my horses, work on my all these other things I had going on, my music. Um, and then that was when I got to go back to wrestle Asuka. And that was so, so cool. And then that got called after that, going like, hey, would you consider coming back? And I'm like, well, yeah, yeah, I guess. Yeah, that'd be cool. I just didn't see it happening for me. But then but when in that moment, I wish in my heart, because I look at hindsight, because then I came in and I, signed to come back and do a whole thing. And I came back in the mask as La Luchadora. And then I came back as my old school wrestling, with the bell bottoms and stuff, which was a throwback. And that was honestly on me because I go like, I feel like the WWE audience knows her. They don't really know. I'd gone to Impact. I'd done the hardcore country character. Hindsight, I wish I would have showed up as hardcore country Mickie James. I think I had already transitioned into my life at that point into hardcore country Mickie James, and I think she would have made a lot of money. And I think like and I don't know because obviously this is all speculation, but I think that they would have had more stuff to do around that character. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just think that the legend Mickie James coming back as old school Mickie James in the bell bottom attire and then playing that role of kind of helping and mentoring Alexa, who was still kind of not very new, but fairly new to the roster, and helped to elevate her and get her over as a monster heel and even all that other stuff. But I feel like the actual excitement of Mickie James coming back was kind of it was that. And I don't know if that's a huge thing in
Hmm.
it, but and that I go like that, well, that's on me because I was proposed that. And I kind of was like, I sat back and I thought and I go, oh God, I don't know. And I didn't know if they would go for hardcore country because at the same time they hadn't made that relationship or like where Impact had given up the rights to the music. That didn't come till later with the the Hardys and stuff like that. So it was
And
just a
and
yeah,
WWE did not create that character, and we
they did
know that
not.
we
But it
we
would
know that
still
there's a
be
lot of times that they're like a little hesitant to present something that was
yeah, and I
created
didn't know
elsewhere.
if that was going to be a big ask, I think, for me. And I don't know why I didn't just go like, oh, I should be hardcore country Mickie James because that's what I've been doing and it's something different, or if they would even see it. And yeah, I don't know, but that would have been cool. I think it would have been cool to come back and do the run as her, because I had evolved, wrestling had evolved, women's wrestling had evolved, and I think it would have made a statement of the fact that I was one of the few people to be able to leave there and then completely reinvent and recreate myself and stay relevant in a whole other space without it. You know what I mean? And
And in
so
some ways almost exceed, in my opinion, what we had seen from you previous. I think that like
yeah,
you grew in such an exponential way that we got to love you in an entirely different capacity.
right, right. Well, because I think felt like it was a little bit more authentic for me, and I think authenticity really translates on television the most. Like, and I think that that's really why we fell in love with so many characters before because it was coming from an authentic space, of themselves, just amplified. But my heel work and Impact was some of my favorites. That ladder promo, the cage match. There's certain things like so I have like little cool moments everywhere I've gone. So that's really awesome, I think. So it says a lot um about my career and about my journey.
So we have like I really want to talk about Empower because that's so exciting. And I think that I just want to put it out there. The reason I didn't want to like sidestep the obvious, that's the elephant in the room. And it's also been talked about by a million people with you at this point. But I did want to get it out there because our viewers are going to want to know as well. And I think it lays the groundwork for the questions that are going to be coming up, because one of the things that we are talking about is the NWA all-female pay-per-view that's going to be coming at the end of August, part of an entire huge weekend of NWA activities. And you're producing it. You went from this opportunity potentially to produce like just a segment behind the scenes or whatever, to now producing this major event. And I want to talk to you and hear what the genesis of this idea was and what you're finding to be super challenging about it right now.
Um, there are a lot of challenges that I did anticipate and some I didn't anticipate. But the idea I think started because whilst I'm going through everything with my career, my injury, trying to rehab, come back, have a comeback, but it was, all these things that were happening and transpiring. But I've also been sitting back and watching the growth of the NWA, and Billy's been my friend for 20 years at this point. Met him way back at TNA days at Nashville Fairgrounds with Jeff and Jerry Jarrett, and then those days with Raven and Julio De Niro and CM Punk and that whole the gathering. And so I've known Billy for a long time and seen him, and I saw him when in Chicago when he was doing that group he was doing there, and then just kind of conversations, and it's just weird, and then so the work that Nick and him and their whole team and Billy's whole everybody that they have there have been putting on in for the NWA alone, and I just to see it like get this whole new breath of life, because you look back and I look back to the NWA when I was on the independent scene, or even when I was back at the independent scene back in 2010-ish, whatever that was, up until I came back. It was kind of a dead brain. Like, I say that and I say this with love, but it was very sad because it was a kind of a dead brand in a sense of like it didn't have the seriousness to it as it does again now, as it once had. And like I think that they've taken the time to really uh bring that legacy back and the history back and tell those stories in a different way that doesn't it's not like any type of wrestling that you see on TV anywhere else. It's its own unique product that throws back to the wrestling that I fell in love with, that I used to watch, that made me fall in love with wrestling as a little girl with my dad. So it's just like there's so much stuff, and to see that happen kind of behind the scenes and being like a rah-rah supporter over here and watching them put in the work, like it's been really, really amazing. And so we're sidebarring here because we obviously live together. He's my husband.
I was going to say, I'm like, it's quite all right, Mickie, to be a
Yeah.
complete
So
cheerleader for the growth of the NWA, which most people would directly attach to your husband. I mean, you're living
right.
with the
Yeah.
NWA
And
World
I think,
Champion.
yeah, and everyone there. But a lot of people don't realize like Nick works every day and he's doing stuff for the NWA. Like he's devoted everything to the company, to Billy, to the brand, because he's on Team NWA for, like he just, and he loves it, and I think and that was the one thing of even just like, oh, I'll just go over to the NWA. I didn't want to take like step on or take away from all this work that my husband's put in, because if you think about before I went back, we were already aligned, and I think he's had such growth as a champion, as a character, as a
Mhm.
person, as a father, as a human, like in these last years as we've been on all this. I would never want to take that spotlight off of all this work that he's done, but at the same time I'm like, Billy, because we're friends, it's like, well, why don't I get what you're, because we've had these conversations about the women's show. We've had these conversations about what I kind of wanted to transition and what I kind of saw for women's wrestling overall. He's like, well, I think we could just do it. We should just do it together. And then it's not, you know what I mean? So it's, you can head that up, you can lead that up and really try to help present our women in a really cool way. And let's do that. And then, and it puts me in it like, so that way I'm like, now I feel like I'm on the team, but I'm on, I have this like whole thing that's the little rah-rah of the ladies over here that we're gonna take over, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this one quote. I'm reading it here. So like I saw this one quote on your social media that said when you were talking about NWA and Power, and it said, "No more novelty shit," with an
Right.
asterisk. And to me, that brings to mind so many things, right? Like that we've seen in women's wrestling. We've seen it grow from like literally it was considered a novelty act, because there'd be two women presented every few cards. And this is with like for
Right.
the viewers, this is like in the pre-80s, right? Even,
Right.
but there would be like the women were a novelty act. And then we've seen it grow to some of the novelty acts that we've seen, like the pillow fights and things like that. And then
Gravy
to
bowl.
more recently, the what was supposed to be and what was a tremendous step forward, which was the women's evolution in WWE, but because there was no follow-up on it, it took on this feel of a gimmick, one-off novelty act.
Right. Yeah. Well, and
What does that mean to you though? What does no more?
novelty, well, novelty means like just a marketable thing that I can put on the shelf and I can, you know, like a novel, a gimmick, a little, a trinket, if you will.
Yeah,
No, and I say I've participated. I was always one of those characters. I worked so hard to be a wrestler, and I remember in some of those times of having like the water gun. I actually enjoyed the water gun fight. Like I always tried to make the most out of every segment that I was involved in and enjoyed it. The pillow fights, like I would just find whoever, Maria or somebody, and be like, let's just like bust this pillow wide open. Like or do so because you have to take what you're given and make it gold, no matter what it is. If you're given an opportunity, if you want it, and there's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to do. Dr. Tom Pritchard quote there of like, you got to learn to love the taste of shit. Like,
that's literally on my list of questions.
yes, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you're going to have to do and that I've had to do and that so many have had to do along the way that they didn't necessarily love. But if you can do that and turn it into gold, then imagine what you can do when you're given an actual pile of gold. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I've always just taken everything. And I did make the most of those moments and I was happy to do whatever. But at the same time, I think we've moved so far beyond that. We've moved from lingerie fights. And don't get me wrong, I also agree in different characters, and not every female needs to be a 5-star wrestler on the show. I believe in space like places for different people depending on what they're good at. If they're a great
Absolutely.
talker and a character and a manager, that's money to me. So yeah, but we don't need to make them a wrestler, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So I
I
think that,
agree
and
with
I
you,
think,
by the way.
yeah,
Every
I just
single
think
person brings something marketable to the table. And if it's the
right.
same thing from everyone, there's no specialty to it.
Well, exactly. There's no, that is, and I say like that's not like just a novelty thing, but I think that by forcing that character to then come and try to wrestle with these 5-star wrestlers, it only brings down the credibility of the wrestling and the champion as a whole, rather than saving that for a novelty, more of a novelty style match based on character
Exactly.
development, etc. Um, but I just feel like there's just I've kind of just gone off on a tangent there. But I just think that you get a lot of these things, and I just think that the business has evolved, and the real synergy around women's wrestling as a whole has changed, and the respect for it has changed, and that came from the fans. That came from the fans kind of rising up and going like, no, we want to see the women. And then you look at some of the segments on television, and a lot of times, and I remember I can refer to Impact at this time. The reason why the knockouts were getting 3 segments a show for is because they were the highest rated segments on the show. Period. So it's not, to me, I know that women draw money. I know that women draw ratings. It's all in how you present them, you know? Um, and they were ahead of their time and doing it far before this kind of surgeons. And I thought that, we had made such a monumental stride by announcing evolution. And I think we all thought that
Mhm.
this was the start of something really, really cool. Like this wasn't, well, I don't think anyone thought it was going to be a one-off. I think that everyone had hoped for a yearly event, or perhaps there's so much content that goes out and that was going out. And I felt like there was always content needed to be able to really build stories around all of these girls to get to, people to know them like like a 24 or 30 for 30, to get to know them on a real level, to get that. But there was just so much we could do. Uh, but yeah, I don't know why Evolution 2 never happened. And then, and I think that we all collectively wanted it, not just in the locker room, but the
Mhm.
fans and even the women on the independents, because, you know, getting those opportunities like the Mae Young Classic or like Evolution or now Empower, which we do hope is not, it's not going to be a one off. This is just the first of many. So I just hope that, I really want to make this something really unique and special, and a way to highlight the women in a different way that you don't necessarily see on modern television today. And I think that there's a cool way to do that from a female perspective. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. And then I got back the argument of like, oh, it's the lowest rated pay per view of all time, and I'm like, well, that's not true, because I'm going like, mind blown me, right? What? It was only really promoted for a month. The matches weren't even announced, but like a week or two before, there was like zero promotion or marketing, or it was almost set up to fail. It was designed like so. When I go like, well, if there was as much like energy and focus put into it, as perhaps some of the other events, and really made and highlighted as kind of how monumental this actually is, then perhaps that wouldn't have been true. But actually, it's not true. So I don't get that point. But however, it really put a stamp in me because it set me back. And I remember that was one of the final conversations I had with, the writer or someone on there. And I was like, and I appreciated so much of them being just brutally honest with me, because instead of beating around the bush as I kind of thrown this thing out, and I just gotten the, oh, that's interesting, or oh, yeah, yeah, like the just, blase, whatever. And so
Mhm.
yeah, so I appreciate, like, and I always do. I have friends around me that are going to be brutally honest with me, and I appreciate that and respect it, even if it's not what I want to hear, because anyone can tell you what you want to hear. Your friends will tell you what you don't want to hear. So yeah, and so here we are.